Well, hello everyone and welcome to Nature Live. My name is Natalie and I'll be your host for today's event, The World Through My Lens, from the Falklands to India, where we'll be meeting a wildlife photographer who's been around the world taking some amazing photographs of wildlife and how this has changed his life and what he's up to trying now to help that wildlife that he has been taking so many photos of. Now, Nature Live is your chance to ask questions, so if there's anything you'd like to find out during the event today, you don't have to wait till the end. You can pop up your hand at any point. So if you would like to know something, do that. If you're near the sides or at the front, I'll come to you with a microphone so that everyone can hear what you have to say. For those of you a bit further back, I'll just ask you to shout out your question and I'll repeat it so that everyone can hear. Now, as I said, we're going to be finding out more, particularly about the Falklands and India and the amazing wildlife that Craig has photographed. So Craig is joining us here today, and could you tell us a little bit about how you got into wildlife photography and what you've been looking at throughout your life?
Firstly, thank you for turning up. It's a great honour for me to be back. Where did it start? It started as a child, really. I just turned a hobby into a profession. I don't see it as a job now, I see it as a way of life, paying my bills through some images as the byproduct, but I see it as a way of life. When I say turned a hobby into a profession, there's a picture up on the screen there as a 12-year-old. Yeah, I used to breed zebra finches as a child. That's a small little family shed that my mother allowed me to have. Half of it was where the birds slept. I built that little flight area and I used to just study zebra finches, which I used to breed. Alongside it is my first picture of an elephant in London Zoo. I sort of dislike zoos a little bit because I'm a wildlife photographer, seeing animals locked up or in captivity isn't great, but there's lots of children under this roof, and it's to inspire them, it's the only time that they'll see animals in a zoo. But that's really where my start, really, should we say, comes from, and it's not really ended. It's a path, it's a road, it's a way of life, I'd like to say, rather than taking a picture. There's me picture, what do you think? I'm not really that kind of guy. I love nature, and the camera allows me to communicate, should we say, to people that I don't know, but have a common interest in nature.
So obviously, if your interest started in childhood, did you grow up in the countryside where there was lots of nature around you, or somewhere a little bit different?
I grew up in Stoke-on-Trent, which is in the Midlands, suburban place. Come home from school, we lived in a council house, single parent. My mum brought us up. In that sense, would allow me to go into little areas that the council had let overgrown that weren't touched. And I used to just sit there with a bottle of water, maybe a flask, some cold toast, draw pictures, and just study nature. I learnt a great deal in those early days that I still use today. You sit and you respect animals, and animals will give you respect back. And the art of photography is capturing something you see. If by your presence you're disturbing something, you're only going to get the tail end of something disappearing off. This is a book that I do a lot of talking about, really, Nat, and there's my love for a tiger. You can't see at the side, it's got an orangutan, which was amazing, but that was a picture by my late mum that she brought me for my 8th birthday present from Woolworths. I've still got that. It's still a bit doggied around the edges, but I find great comfort in looking at that. She passed away, and I wouldn't say dedicated, but my work today really carries on some of those things that she taught me, that freedom, that respect, that love for nature. And I'd like to think that's represented still in my work today. So that book has a major sort of start for me and a foundation, and my love of tigers on the front. I used to trace around that at school. So when I look at it, it always makes me smile, but it's looking a bit dog rough at home now. So I might have to put it in some kind of case, or in airtight case, because it's not rotting, but it's degrading, should we say. So, it's 30 years old.
Well, it's incredible to think that, being inspired at such a young age to go on to become a wildlife photographer and get to go all around the world. So did you go straight into photography when you were older?
No, my start in wildlife photography, really, that first picture that you saw was when I was 12. I came third in a photo competition run by the Daily Mirror. It was just a picture of my brother in a sandcastle. My mum couldn't afford to take us to London. In the 80s, it was a massive thing, single parent, school meals, clothes from the catalogue. So a trip to London was a massive, massive adventure. So I was unable to go, but I won an Olympus Trip 35 camera, which is an old film camera. I had it a couple of months. I used to pester my mother, I want this, I want that, and we couldn't really afford, so I had to sell it. And I brought some binoculars, and I never picked up a digital SLR till my early 30s. And you know, that's really my start in photography. I joined the army at 16. I left school. School wasn't great for me. My mum passed away. You know, I couldn't really express a great deal at school. I was good at art. I was good at drawing. I didn't know at the time. Now there's a fancy label. I was sort of borderline dyslexic. I still have problems spelling. I don't see that as a hindrance. I actually see that as something that empowered me to do something more visually. So it was art, it was composition, it was things that I was interested in. I joined the army at 16, and that's my first introduction, should we say, to photography. But I never, like I said, never picked up a camera again till my early 30s, really, Natalie.
So your time in the army, that was the first time that you experienced the Falkland Islands.
Yeah,
and it's
yeah.
somewhere that you were quite inspired by, wasn't it?
Yeah.
What were your experiences there that impacted your future career?
The Falklands is still known today as an island which 16 hours away. It's a little part of Britain in the middle of nowhere. People are fiercely staunch of British, and while I was there this year, they were doing a referendum on staying British. And it's quite nice, you know, English teas and British flags everywhere. And they're almost more British than us, if that makes sense. So when I was stationed there in the forces, I just remember the wildlife was just so trusting. You know, a lot of the areas like this picture is still mined. The Argentinians just literally threw mines everywhere, and a lot of the areas are, you know, still out of bounds. But nature's, you know, has that power to overtake things and reclaim things. But the wildlife was so trusting, and we were saying earlier that, you know, it's so nice to think that all wildlife was this trusting once. It's only the impacts of human beings that have made it, you know, almost scared of its own shadow. This picture's two little elephant seals. We discussed this earlier. Elephant seals are weaned very young from the mother, which means the mother feeds them a high-fat diet very quickly. And as soon as they're fed up and, you know, and they are ready to be weaned, the mother sort of gets rid of them, almost like leaving home. So on this morning, there was these two found solace in each other, and it was quite a sad picture. Seal's eyes make a beautiful picture, but the story behind this was there was a pod of females behind that were having nothing to do with them because, you know, Mother Nature says that you two are ready to join the outside world. And I just watched this, and, you know, it isn't just about pressing your shutter. I could see every time that they tried to rejoin the pod, the parents would shoo them off, and I knew there was something to miss. And by watching that, you know, you can see great sadness, and these two found comfort with each other. And that's a nice picture. It's very emotive, but all I did was just watch, and that's really the essence of my photography, watching. It's not about camera equipment, it's not about settings. Those help, but it's just really mainly watching and building up that experience. This was just to put in, just to show you how close you can get. These are rockhoppers. They're quite tough little penguins. I don't know if you've seen some of the cartoons. They always portray them as very feisty. And they're almost like that in personality. They're very funny. So I just put this in just to show you how trusting, you know, if this was in the UK, you've got no chance with animals and around the world, but just shows you they're coming down from the nesting colony and they were just going out to sea, and there's yours truly. But it's rockhoppers are quite funny, quite tough.
So, I mean, you can get so close to the wildlife there, and there's such a variety you can see. And obviously, being quite isolated and quite remote, there's a lot of space there and a lot of room to be.
Very trusting, and like I said earlier, all wildlife would have been like this at one time, very trusting towards you. I keep saying that word, but trust is a massive thing. You know, if somebody knocked on your door unannounced and barged their way in, they wouldn't be really welcome. But if you've got an invite and you show some respect and you take your shoes off and you knock on the door, you're going to be welcome, and it's very, very similar to the natural world. You can't just burst in somewhere and just unannounced. You know, you're going to scare them. You're going to do a lot of things, and that isn't really great for photography. But on an ethical issue where I work quite ethically, you know, you just step back and just watch. And this is quite a funny picture.
I didn't notice, but there are some elephant seals in this picture. They're the little pods here. I didn't notice this the first time that Craig showed me the picture.
This is just using a little fish eye, and the fish eye, if you turn it down, it just gives this wonderful effect. And this was just these were the pod of females that had just ousted out those two youngsters. They were sleeping and the youngsters were together, but some of the boulders there look quite funny, and it's
So does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask Craig at this point? It's okay if you don't. You can just pop your hand up at any time. You don't have to wait for me to ask you. So how different was the Falklands to other places that you photographed, like India, for instance?
the contrast between India and the Falklands are almost like chalk and cheese. India is very vibrant. It's superpower, population growth, amazing. I've been visiting there since 2009. It's an 8-hour drive to Ranthambore. I was there in April of this year, and you can drive on a tarmac road all the way to Ranthambore. When I first started to go to India, you could only travel, a quarter of the distance. So it just shows the progression. Problem is, there's national parks where there's only so many tigers in India. Ranthambore's got about 32. The pressure from the public, the villages taking over the land is massive. India's a massive country, massive population, and the tigers really are in the way. So you're getting conflict really there. Falklands, hardly anybody, very remote. The wildlife sort of come up to you and say, "What are you doing?" So the contrast really is almost chalk and cheese, which is sad. This is a beautiful, site in the Falklands. You wouldn't see a soul. There's some areas in India you could see this, but the wildlife seems to be quite free there, should we say, and it feels safe. Whereas in India, the tigers, you really sense that these 32 tigers, if the guards weren't vigilant, should we say, they'd be disappeared. But I was there in April this year, and a mother that was my first tiger had gone missing. She's poached, and she left 3 tigers a year old under a tree, and those tigers still haven't moved to this day. The forest department are putting out buffalo carcasses, but the Indian government haven't sort of admitted that her mother, who was called Lady of the Lakes, is missing. That happened while I was there. So it's a very poignant, really, message that, how fragile everything is.
So you mentioned there that Ranthambore was where you went to in India.
Yeah,
How do you get to these remote places? And as you say, there's a specific population of tigers that you were looking at while you were there. How did that come about? How did you get that relationship?
I just went on my own, just roughed it. I had some names and I had some introductions to people that I needed to see, so I just travelled there, planes, cars and automobiles like the film, and I just turned up in Ranthambore, and I was helped. I couldn't really afford a great deal of the safari, so I gave photography lessons, sold some of my images. I met some guides. They just thought I would make me passion. I'd waited so long from that boot to see a tiger, and nothing was going to stop me. So I met some nice guys, some brilliant guides that I still work with today. And Ranthambore is an old fort in the middle of a state called Rajasthan. It's been taken over by nature now. It's a beautiful story. Natural England and the BBC programme and the natural programmes do a lot of filming there. Lady of the Lake, Matchley, and the recent one, Broken Tail. They're all sort of filmed in this reserve, and you'll see small little gateposts like this completely taken over, and the wildlife lives around them. It's a magical place, absolutely magical. It really is like Rudyard Kipling's Jungle Book, the smells, the noises, and that's really our and then 2010, 11, 12, 13, I take like-minded clients, friends there. I do my own trips. I support charities locally there. I help women's refugees there. I help, this next year I'm going to give some workshops to local communities, empowering them to look after the tigers. I also help raise money for a charity called 21st Century Tiger, where most of the profit from my sales go to helping wild tigers. It's just something that I wanted to do. It's just something that, as a professional photographer, it really is about doing your bit rather than just capturing that image. The image can speak for me, or I'm trying to do a little bit more with tigers, with charities.
Now, as you said, there's that population of Bengal tigers around that Ranthambore fort that you were going out there especially to photograph. How did you do anything to set up these shots? How did you go about getting these pictures?
It's hard to explain, so I'm just going to break it down. Ranthambore is split into zones. It's a massive area, and you get about 5 to 6 zones, and you have a license to enter these zones. You stay in a small Suzuki Rhino Jeep. That's one from this year. My driver and guide. My clients are in the back, and I rotate myself between the Jeeps. you'll see the small track, and you literally drive around between 3 and 4 hours in the morning and 3 and 4 hours in the afternoon, and you stay on this track. And if you're lucky enough to see the tigers, you know, you've got seconds to get your picture, and oh God, wow, and it's just gone. By virtue, the tigers actually use these tracks as well to cut down on injuries to the pads. It's easy to navigate their own zones. It's easy to scent mark and to see what's going on. So 9 times out of 10, the tigers are on these tracks or moving around. So it's a good way to see, but you're not always guaranteed to see tigers. This was a cub from this year. We had some wonderful moments. This is called the Sultan of Ranthambore, named after a famous ruler. They give them some really dramatic names, the Indian people do. And this is a 1-year-old cub. It's the only cub left. Its mother feeds it. It's grown really big, and it was just coming out of the water. The mother called it there. So we had some beautiful moments this year. But this is the Sultan of Ranthambore. You may have heard of Matchuli. She's a famous tigress. I do believe in the future that this one will be the, I wouldn't say superstar, but you know, will be really well known in that area, the Sultan of Ranthambore. So quite a posh name.
Yeah. So do you track the tigers at all? I mean, you say they follow those tracks of your Jeep, but do you have to use any other ways to sort of follow them and find out where they might be to get that perfect shot?
I don't think I've ever taken a perfect shot, Natalie. I don't think there's anything that is a perfect shot. I'll be honest with you, a lot of the shots as a photographer is luck. I've never had a camera lesson. I don't go to camera classes. I'm not a great reader. I just self-taught myself. I shot at many apertures and just went through the camera, just split it all down. And with my passion from my heart of nature, whether it's tigers, whether it's a fox, or whether it's a little blue tit, you can apply that passion on anything. And the tracking skills of tracking these fellas are very similar to badgers and foxes. You know, there's a little track there. I'm not nerdy, but I'm very interested in pellets and tracks and animals that have pooed somewhere or taken off some bark. It's giving you a hidden message. It's almost like, say, you came in from a night out and you were drunk. You'd know what you had to eat last night. There'd be crumbs on the side. You know, the bin might not have been emptied. You might have left a cup of tea on the side. And you can build a story of what somebody that you live with had for their supper at 2:30 in the morning. It's very similar to nature. It's my ideology where you track animals, you look. And this is a track of a male tiger. And it's on one of those tracks. Now, the darker the track, the fresher the track, the lighter the track, the more time that the oxygen and the sun has had time to dry out. By the picture you can see there, it's quite dark. And that's a male tiger that we were hunting one morning. Hunting, I've got to quickly change that word, sort of tracking. I didn't say hunting, that was totally the wrong word, sorry, tracking. And it's quite dark. You'll be able to build a bigger picture even when you look into that. Is it over-pronounced, which means on its side, or under-pronounced? Is it injured? Is there any area of that pad where, you know, there's a light zone, so that means they might be limping? So you can build up a lot of that. I sort of really look into these things, and you know, if you're into wildlife or photography, I'd really empower you to, you know, when you're walking somewhere, if you come across something, just stop and look, and perhaps remember, is it dark, it's fresh, sit down, and you know, the animal might come back. But we track the tigers like that with a guide, but I've been going there many times now. You know, I sort of end up tracking myself, but I work with guides that I trust. This is a male tiger coming towards you, and I can't explain what it feels like for a tiger to come so close. There's a friend in the audience, Alan. He was with me this day, and we had an amazing time on this. This is called T6. Very impersonal, the numbers. I dislike how they name tigers, but they do that to stop them being trophies or almost poached to order. So they have a T, and then whichever number lets the authorities know what they are. But the Indian people have given them names. This is T6, massive dominant male coming towards my Jeep, and that was his track earlier, so we were quite lucky that morning. But amazing animals, amazing.
So does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask? Yeah, you first and then I'll come to you. Yeah.
You talked about working with projects
Yep.
with the local people, so you obviously get to interact a lot, but what arguments do you use to them to persuade them that it's better to support and expand the reserve rather than kill the tigers?
Yeah.
Yeah, how's that relationship with local people and wildlife? How does that?
It's a good question. I start by using my picture, should we say, because most of the locals don't have our technology, so they wouldn't really see pictures of tigers, and they may never come across a tiger even though that they live in these places. It isn't my place to say what's right and wrong. I'm not a scientist or a conservation. I only speak from the heart. There's a lot of people that do that, and there's a lot of organisations that do that. But on the ground, we're asking rangers to look after tigers with flip-flops and a wooden staff. I met some friends this year. I always take them gifts. Conferences all around the world, spending thousands and thousands of pounds on accommodation and getting a Hollywood star to talk. But the guys on the ground have no equipment, a battery and a little radio against a very tough, well-organised poaching organisation headed up by militants and people from China. So it's tough. But if you empower the local people to remember that these tigers are better alive than dead, they start to look after them. They start to forgive if their own cattle or donkey goes missing, because some of these tigers encroach onto the areas. So the message really, I don't really want to be, I know better than you because it's their country. I think if you try to tell people on their own soil what's right and wrong, I think it'll go against you. But I use some of my images. I've met many people where I go into local communities. There's women's refuges there that help women, that give a lot back to local communities. I just go there, show them a slideshow, and they sort of like my, I'm just a photographer. I'm not a conservation. But I don't think I've got a straight answer for you. It's just literally, keep trying. Like with the orangutans and many other places around the world, people are realising if their commodity, dare I say, was alive, it's better to have a source of tourism rather than paying, a bounty or a fee for that animal to be killed. And once that's gone, the whole village collapses and everything goes. So it's all dire straits, and it's a difficult one. There's 32 tigers. There was a tiger went missing while I was there. Was it villagers? Was it poachers? It's very hard. So hopefully that answers your question. There's no right and wrong, but I try and do anything that I can. I give my time free. I give my images for free. I give talks. And, seeing somebody outside of their country so interested might empower them to go, God, Westerns are coming over. What can we do about our own tigers? So that's the message that I try to sort of say. But everything's hanging so fragile in the balance. But I think there's enough people there working to say, look after your tiger, rather than having someone from Chinese origin saying, kill us one for £1,000, but once it's gone, it's gone. So if that answers your question.
I had a question up there. I'll come to you with the mic because you're a bit closer.
Hi. To what extent is a similar question, but is the relationship with the local community, is that what gives you the knowledge about tracking, and how are those skills learned? You said you don't necessarily study about the photography side, but kind of a lot of details about the tracking. Is that from this close relationship with the locals, or is that something you've learned before?
That picture, that book, my mum used to allow me to go into nature as a kid. I lived in a suburban concrete jungle, and even to this day there's still areas where the council have let overgrow, and you'll see a sign. Not so many today, but there was in the 80s. And my mum used to let me go out. I used to take a little book, a flask, and I used to learn, and I learned very quickly that my moment with nature would last longer if I made myself smaller, if I was quieter, if I was more careful, and if I really almost thought like the animal. That could sound a little bit far-fetched. How can you think like a fox? How can you think like a badger? I use that term very loosely. Just remember, you stand up, they'll see you. So the tracking skills of the tiger really is quite easy because they're slow-moving. They give you big tracks. So those skills, really, it's a great question we learned as a child. I wasn't really very good at photography. I've never had a camera lesson. I don't say that to be a smarty pants, because there's lots of brilliant qualifications that you can do. But I learned myself, and my quality work hopefully speaks for itself. My images start there, and it's projected through my eye. But I believe that my forte is that the ethical way that I work, those childhood memories that I hold very dear to this day, and those ethics where we are visitors, really. So trying to find a tiger on a path is a bit easier than trying to find a terrified badger or a fox. So, they're so big. But I don't mean that to sound sort of too confident. But there's always clues. You could go home out of here, you could see fresh pigeon poo, you know, you could see anything, and then if you stopped, it might be a regular place where something comes. So nature will give us clues. We've just got to stop and watch. So, but I've gone off the track a little bit there. But my background really starts as a little kid, cold toast, little flask, and off I went. And and that's really my foundation to my images today. I simplify photography with settings. I think there's a lot of stuff that people read about and equipment, but I think especially with wildlife, you just need to get out with nature and capture that. So hopefully that answers. But thank you for the question.
Yeah, question at the
How
front.
did you grab a camera at a fairly late age? How did you roll it?
Sorry, say again, sorry.
How did you grab a camera at a fairly late age, like as in your 30s?
I've always been interested in nature. I've always had binoculars. I've always gone into nature. I was in the army till 22, 23. I came out, I played rugby league, I did lots of sports, I did lots of manly things, but in my spare time I always went into nature so I had binoculars. I was very good at art at school. Like I said, I wasn't really good at any of the other stuff, so I used to find myself drawing 2 circles and, you know, rubbing out the circles and drawing feathers, or if it was a tail on a fox. And I was, without knowing this, I was almost doing a photograph on a piece of paper with a different shading of pencils, and I'd get back home and I'd have a drawing of that, and I'd make some, like, if it had a limp or any feathers. And I believe that's where my photography came from. I had a concept of composition, capturing behaviour, beak open or wing beats or scratching. And I've always been interested in photography, but I really missed the boat when I was young, you know, single parent. You know, it was very positive for me, my upbringing, should we say. But from that background, it gave me a drive, it made me learn. But I was behind on a few things, but I could sort of speak through nature and drawings. So all the way through my adult life, I've had binoculars, I've sort of gone off climbing and walking. I'm a trained I do climbing, and I used to see things, rooks on a ledge, and I'd draw. So if I'm honest with you, I think that's where my photography began. When I introduced myself to a camera, you know, I emailed people, I've got books, and it just seems, I just couldn't understand. Nobody got back. You know, it's a busy world. You send emails, you wait, you check your inbox. If any famous professionals ever got back to me at that time, no. Check my inbox, no. And I just sort of set about taking a picture at every aperture, every different shutter speed. I put them on my computer, and I taught myself how detail grew and didn't grow, and how things got blurred and not blurred, how things got overexposed and underexposed. And I picked out key settings that worked, and I took a piece of paper that I still got today, and I took that out into the world of nature, and I used to use those 4 or 5 settings. And today I do one-to-one workshops. I've been doing that for 4 years. Very successful. I just take a client from dawn till dusk. They come with me, and what I've just touched on, I show them all that fieldcraft, tracking, smells, and building a picture. Taking a photograph, no disrespect, really is the easy bit, should we say, if you're dealing with wild animals. I don't do captive, I don't do setups, I don't put some food down. I really try to work alongside wildlife, and a lot of my images, I think, portray that. There's no clean backgrounds, there's no perching. I don't try to change the behaviour of an animal by my presence. You could say, what does that mean? Well, if you come close to an animal, it's going to be scared, it's going to be terrified, so I try to downplay that, and I work very ethically. It's time consuming, put a lot of effort into my projects, but every image on my website, or every image that you can say, I can tell you the settings where it was, that moment, and I think I benefit from that. And once I show people that, I think their benefit of photography comes from that. I've gone way off track, so I'm very sorry about that, but photography, I've always done photography, but with a pencil, I think, and the art and the poor schooling, I think it all really came together. And I've got some of my old drawings, I perhaps should have brought them, but I think that was my photography. But I missed the boat at 12, but it's come full circle now, back to me in my late 30s, and it's nice to know that nobody's owed nothing, but it's come full circle through adversity, through, you know, lack of opportunities as a 12-year-old getting this fancy camera. I used to look at this Olympus trip and dust it off, and it became a bit of a, you know, wow, but I couldn't really use it because of lack of funds. So that's really my start, but nature, this, tracking, working. That's where wildlife photography starts, not in a magazine or not in a big fancy lens. Those just give you more choices. If you go into a shop with £1, you can only buy a Mars bar. If you go in with a £5, you can buy a pie, a drink and a Mars bar. If you go in with £10, anything's anything's on offer. What that means is the better of your equipment, it just gives you more choices. Photography starts there really with me, and hopefully that message comes over. But